One of the first things I learned is don't hire people until you have money in the bank. Because the biggest source of stress for most of the entrepreneurs that I interact with on a daily basis is how to make payroll.
Because you have lived through 12, 13 boom cycle and then again post-COVID. 21, 22, we had another bull cycle, bull run. So do you think there were any differences, like had the ecosystem matured much more in 10 years down the line, or it was still the same frenzy?
I presume we came from a very conservative, middle class background, and business was not exposed back then. And you still went ahead and started the business. You did multiple ventures. But what are those a couple of things that you had to learn very, very fast to kind of move forward? Good day, guys. Welcome back to Building in India. This is a podcast that we do for all first generation founders who are building in India. And today we have a very dear friend and a special guest, Mr. Udhay. Udhay, thanks for coming on the show. I'd like to introduce Udhay as one of my good friends who likes to collect interesting people over beards. And Udhay's been in the ecosystem for a long period of time, wearing different hats as entrepreneur, investor, advisor, mentor, accelerator starter. I think I'll leave the battle to Udhay to talk more about yourself and your journey so far. And I think it's a very, very interesting conversation that could potentially go for 10 hours. But
Yeah, great. Thank you for having me. And how do I introduce myself? A quick way to introduce myself is I've been in the ecosystem for over 3 decades now. I started my career as an entrepreneur, and I started in non-tech entrepreneurship. I tried a number of different things, including trying to export agarbattis,
Wow.
trying to be involved in some CNC machining jobs, and then stumbled into technology via doing CAD drawings. So I joined a friend of mine. We were doing the donkey work of converting mechanical drawings into CAD format, physical engineering drawings.
Mm-hmm.
It was plentiful work, but it was donkey work, like I said. And eventually we started doing higher value stuff by doing architectural CAD. So this was 1992. So there were not that many architects that were even using computers for design or drafting. So we decided that's a good market to go after. And we said to some architects, we will help you get started in this. We will help you use computers for design, for drafting. We will tell you what computers to buy. We will sell you those computers. We will install the software. We will train you on the software. We will even hire people on your behalf and so on. And then we got into making 3D models for those architects. And
wow, you were back in 1993.
93, 94. Yeah.
Wow.
Was the internet then in India?
No. So there's an interesting story attached to that as well, which I'll come to. So we had a really, really high-end computer, which had 96 MB of RAM, GB, right? The typical Windows computer had 4 MB of RAM.
Wow.
So, and we had a machine that had 96 MB of RAM. But even that, for doing a 3D render, you would start it on Friday, lock up and go home and come back on Monday. Right? So that's what we used to do. But anyway, the idea was to introduce myself and not get sucked up into these stories, of which I have plenty. So post that, I got involved with the early online scene, first through dial-up bulletin boards. And then eventually I got contacted by a gentleman in the US who wanted to start a business in India making something called websites, 1995. So I helped him to run this. It might have been the first business based out of India doing websites. Sank without trace. This person decided to go back to his fancy McKinsey job. And I, with a couple of friends, started an internet consulting company.
So that was the time when you start. So that was the time you started the whole bulletin board email list that you still continue to do today.
The email list,
Yeah.
Silk list, yeah. That's one of the oldest surviving email lists around. That's true. So this we tried to make a go of it for a couple of years. Ended up shutting it down. Did a few different things. Helped to launch one of the first portals in India, run by Satyam Infoway.
Mm.
And also got involved with a wireless internet startup, which went on to become the first Indian startup to get Silicon Valley VC money. Moved to the Bay Area for a bit during the dot-com boom years. Moved back during the bust years. My first stint in venture capital was in 2001 with a boutique fund/incubator called Iponics, which also eventually became a victim of the dot-com crash. Post that, I did a number of things. I was at Yahoo for a bit. I helped to build the backend that powered all of their community products. Was at Intel for several years, where among other things, I worked in an internal incubator trying to build new products for emerging markets. I've had a more recent stint on the investor side of the table. I ran a startup accelerator. Since then, I've been doing largely similar things in my personal capacity, trying to help early stage founders. I try to help founders figure out things like strategy and market entry and fundraising and so on, which also involves being a source of external perspective, a shoulder to cry on, sometimes almost a therapist. But that's, believe it or not, only part of the story. This is my
So
startup.
that's why we exactly
Yeah.
have you on the show, right? Who better, right? So, Uday, if I were to just step back into your early years, your formative years of running a business as a first-time founder, you obviously didn't know a lot of things and you made a lot of mistakes, right? And so, what were those one or two very important things that you learned very quickly? Was it? Well, I presume you came from a very conservative, middle class background, and business was not exposed back then, and you still went ahead and started the business. You did multiple ventures, but what are those a couple of things that you had to learn very, very fast to kind of move forward?
But I can talk about my experience. I'm not recommending this as advice to anybody else. But
Very
one of the
clear disclaimer.
one of the first things I learned is don't hire people until you have money in the bank, right? Because the biggest source of stress for most of the entrepreneurs that I interact with on a daily basis is how to make payroll,
Employee salaries.
how to pay that.
Yeah.
So don't hire people until you have money in the bank. And don't even become an entrepreneur till you have your first customer. I mean, it's very, very basic thing. But I see a lot of fresh grads who jump into the startup world. And that's great because that's when your risk-taking ability is maximum. But that doesn't take away from the fact that you need to do your homework. So don't jump in till you have your first customer. And don't hire people till you have money. I guess these are the two very, very basic things that I learned.
Interesting. And how do you get your first customer before you start a company? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't want this to be a Gyan giving session. But really, the reason that anybody becomes an entrepreneur is you believe you have a better solution
Right.
than what's out there in the market.
Exactly.
Because otherwise, why are you an entrepreneur? So if we were to backtrack along that hypothesis, it is that you have identified a problem and you have identified a solution, which you believe is better in some way. Maybe it's cheaper. Maybe it is doing something that hasn't been done before. But you have to believe that it is better in some way. Because otherwise you have no business being an entrepreneur.
Right.
So that's really the first thing you need to do. And once you solve the problem, the natural question is whose problem are you solving? And are they willing to pay for it? So this is the homework that I believe it makes sense to do before pulling the trigger. Whether you're a student or whether you're in a salaried job or whether you're unemployed.
Right.
All of these things are nice to say. They don't necessarily apply out in the real world, but I'd still say it's good to do these things.
Is sales a very big part of becoming a founder and being an entrepreneur? Did you naturally get into it, adapt into it?
Yes, of course, it's a very important part. part of what I mean by saying don't become an entrepreneur till you have your first customer is obviously you made your first sale. But the big danger is you make your first sale and you think that your second or your 10th or your 50th sale will be exactly similar to that. It typically is not. So and that is something, I guess, if you're a first time entrepreneur, you've got to get these cars and figure it out. Because if you don't figure it out, you will shut down, which is okay. Right? But you need to, in the ideal case, know how to repeatably sell your product or whatever your offering is. But to a first time entrepreneur, saying that have a repeatable sales process is not necessarily advice that is realistic. You got to figure it out. I hope you at least have your first customer before you pull the trigger. And I hope that your next 25 customers they are sufficiently similar to that first customer that you can use that same process to sell. If not, you have to learn.
And you have to at some level embrace the uncertainty and be prepared for failure and deal with it properly.
Let's see, we know from data that at least 7 out of 10 startups fail.
Right.
So the data tells us that these 7 people who fail either are going to go on to try again or maybe opt for
They become good employees.
maybe.
Anyway, as a young founder, I'm doing my first startup. I can improve my chances of success. Like maybe 7 out of 10, I can make it to
If
5.
basic things, if you do your background work and your homework, I think you've already improved your chances of success of being one of the 3 out of 10, which is have your first customer, which means that you have a problem and you have a solution. And you do some of the extremely basic hygiene things like incorporate a company.
Right, of
If
course.
you have more than one founder, have a founder's agreement.
A lot of founders miss that.
So we actually looked at some data back when I was running a startup accelerator of all of the companies that shut shop before they hit 2 years. So 18 months to 2 years is kind of the valley of death. If you pass that, your chances of surviving are much, much higher. So of all of the companies that shut shop in the 18 to 24, before they hit that 18 to 24 month window, the majority of companies that shut shop was not due to commercial factors, but due to founder disagreement.
Founder disagreement. Yeah, I'm not surprised.
So Crunchbase did one survey and they listed down the reasons for why companies fail. And number 1 was founders disagreement.
No, I'm not surprised at all because even my experience looking at, I would have probably seen a couple of thousand founders in my time.
Wow.
And 30 odd years.
Right.
My experience tends to support.
One question I get from a lot of founders is, especially young people or people who have worked for 4-5 years, how do I find a co-founder?
Yeah.
And I always tell them that, listen, it's very difficult to find a co-founder in some online forum or something. You have to know that person for a longer time, maybe worked with him or her before, or your school friend, college friend, to have it, because it's like getting married. So do you get this question?
I get this question and I may have a slightly different point of view than what was just stated. Because there are 2 basic things you need to look at. One is what we like to call the complementarity of skills.
Right.
So in order to get an idea from the idea to prototype to building to shipping to selling to onboarding the customer and repeating the cycles, it requires some set of skills.
Right.
Now, all of these set of skills are typically not present in one founder.
Exactly.
So typically you need to build a founding team that has all of these skills. And ideally those skills should complement each other. That's one set of things you need to look at. The other set of things is personal chemistry, right?
Why?
Are you likely to want to work with these people for an extended period of time? And the complementarity of skills is easy to put on a spreadsheet. This is not.
Right.
And this part I agree with you, which is that you need to figure it out over time. But I would caution against jumping into starting a company with a family member or a close friend. until both of you have had a, similar to a marriage kind of conversation. I would caution you against marrying someone without having this conversation also, because you need to figure out what your big triggers, both positive or negative, are. And then figure out if you can spend a lifetime being either married to this person or working with this person.
Right.
Otherwise, you're running the risk of blowing up this other relationship. And if it's a family member, it's a relationship that you can't walk away from. But if you have a failed business with a family member, and we've got lots of high-profile examples in the ecosystem, which we're not going to name right now, it's not a good thing.
So the time when you went into venture capital was probably the time where the Fab Mall guys raised a lot of money. There are a few companies in India that raised that towards the end of that bust. I think a few companies in India raised money, and it was like a very, I don't know, there was euphoria, and suddenly there was that struck, right? I mean, did that ecosystem change a lot? Because I felt that over the next 3-4 years, it was a prolonged winter. Nobody was talking about startup.
Which year was this?
This is from 2001 end to about 4-5.
So my answer today is going to be different from my answer if you had asked me back in peak of India.
Of course.
Because today I'm speaking with the background of having seen at least 3 or 4 different boom bust cycles. Right? And so today, from where I'm sitting, I recognize that this is cyclical. And it's going to happen over and over again.
Period of time, yeah.
And going back to your specific question, in 2001, there were all of these investors who were sitting on a heck of a lot of what is called dry powder. These are funds raised during the dot-com boom era. They still had that money. But suddenly the prevailing sentiment is to not write these big checks and spray and pray. And once you write the checks also, the prevailing sentiment is not to push the companies for growth at all costs, but rather look at
Conserve cash.
Look at unit economics, do not hire beyond necessity, all of these states. And from having seen multiple cycles like this now, I recognize that this is how it is.
This is par for the course.
It is par for the course. So I'm not sure if that's an answer to your question, but all I'm saying is this is cyclical, and it will happen, and it depends on what point in the cycle you're at.
What kind of companies were coming in India in 2001 to?
So in 2001, it's kind of interesting because you just had the first experience of what you might call Valley-style VC-funded companies.
Okay.
Right? So where the intent is to fail fast, if you fail.
Right.
So that was relatively new. And what was interesting was that the role models in the technology industry that we had were basically software services companies. It is the success story that we had so far, if you're in 2001.
Infy, Pro, TCS.
Yeah, those were the success stories. And those were the role models. And therefore, that is also in some sense the talent pool that you're hiring from, if you're not. So you had to do a lot of storytelling and stage setting, and not just with your customers, not just with your employees, but also with all of the other stakeholders, including the investors, including the general public, because you have to build, if you're building a company for the ages, you have to build an employer brand, all of these things.
Right.
Let me tell you a little story. Right?
You're much tougher back then, right? Compared to no social media.
So let me tell you an interesting story about hiring in 1999 and 2000. So
What were you doing then? Which company were you with?
I was with a wireless internet startup,
Okay.
which was also, among other things, the first Indian company to get Valley VC money.
Wow.
So we spoke to a few smart kids, and one guy was blunt enough to tell us upfront, I love you guys, but I can't join you because I won't get married.
Well, I didn't get the same sort of answer, but I remember in 2017 when I was doing a digital signage company in Trivandrum, a lot of people asked me, don't you have an office in Technopark? And the only then employees will join you because their prospects of marriage and other things people associate.
Sure.
And this is 2017.
So then in that case, what the realization was, the learning was that we are building a brand not for the potential hire, but for the potential in-law of the hire.
Yeah.
Right? So, flirting. So, and fast forward to 2015 when I'm running a startup accelerator. Over half of the applications we got were from people who are either fresh grads or still in the final year of college. In a couple of cases, second year of college. And clearly, the quote-unquote stigma of joining a tech startup has got away, right?
Mm.
And in fact, the pendulum has swung to the other side. It's considered a cool thing to do, even if you fail.
I also think maybe these guys didn't want to get married for 5-6 years. The college guys. So they,
That's the right excuse, right?
they're not worried about.
Here's a story. I have lots of stories like this, but one of the guys we admitted to the very first cohort of the accelerator that I was running. So we had all of the it's like a sales funnel. So people apply and then they go through multiple stages of qualification and so on. Finally, we talked to them one-on-one. And so we were talking to one such person and just asked an open-ended question. Why do you think we should admit into this cohort? So this guy thought for a while and came up with a very, very thought-provoking answer. He said, I am engaged to be married. I have convinced my fiancé and I have convinced my potential in-laws that I should go ahead and do this company. So I have great sales skills.
Did you take him?
Yeah, we did. And so the follow-up to that, which is not related to this, is this guy actually decided it was a 100-day program. During the course of the 100 days, he decided that he would not be profitable.
Okay.
And shut his company. By the time 100 days are over, he was in a different startup. Right? I consider that a successful outcome. Because it is quite likely that without this feedback loop or multiple feedback loops that we had going with him, he might have beaten his head against this wall for a year and a half, 2 years before making the same decision.
Right.
Yeah.
Now he's done it in 100 days. I think that's a successful outcome.
Sure.
Just to come back to the point you made, do you think in India, because of course there's a lot of interest with college students or very young people starting a company, do they make good founders on average or should they work for a few years? I'm sure they have promising ideas.
So here's the thing. When you're a student, is when your risk-taking ability is high.
Highest, of course.
So why not?
But at that time, do you have the exposure to know what to build?
This is the way you get that exposure.
You learn it.
So I'm completely okay with a student or a fresh grad. Just jumping in, making all the mistakes. That's fine. That's when your
Risk appetite is highest.
You learn what to do,
Yep.
what to do, and what not to do.
See, you have to learn all of this in some manner. If you learn in this manner, well and good.
How was the culture back at Yahoo when you joined? It must have been exciting times, right?
It was fun.
The Valley and
So I was at Yahoo here. This was the Yahoo was actually two companies in India. One was the content business, which was headquartered in Mumbai. The other was the R&D backend, which was headquartered in Bangalore. That was the part that I worked at. And I was I think the first senior non-engineering hire they made. And it was very interesting because firstly, I had to get adjusted to the culture over there. The first few days, I showed up for work at 8 a.m. And soon enough, I discovered that the only people who are in the office at 8 a.m. are people who have not yet left. Right? So, and there's all basically they're fresh grads kids who write code and they like to work in the night. So they would come, they would bring their sleeping bags sometimes and just sit and write code. And one additional advantage for these guys.
which is that book, Udhay, about Yahoo, which is somebody on the late shift. It's a very interesting.
The nudist on the late.
The nudist on the late
It's not about Yahoo, but
But yeah. But there are references to Dave Philo and all that, right? Folk Ronson book, yeah.
Sure, yeah. So, but the nudist that they're talking about was at Sun Microsystems. But so, and the story over there is that there was this nudist who was a system admin of some sort at Sun, which had a very freewheeling corporate culture, but not sufficiently freewheeling that they were okay with nudism. And it is because of this one individual that there was a change made to the employee handbook, they introduced a dress code. And the dress code says, you shall be dressed.
Clothes.
You said it.
So anyway,
So wait, when you were the first non-technical hire at Yahoo
or
R&D.
senior program manager kind of hire. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So you stopped going to office at 8 o'clock.
I started going to office at 8 as well. Yeah. So, but it was a very interesting, point in time and space because just like you hear about the PayPal mafia and so on in the valley, today you hear about, for example, Flipkart mafia.
Yeah.
Right.
Number of those people used to work at the Yahoo.
Yeah.
So I'd say the
In Mobi has a lot of Yahoo people.
so the Indian startup, there are various Indian startup ecosystem mafias, and a number of those mafia members, if you will, have passed through the Yahoo STC in Bangalore.
Nice.
Was Yahoo one of the first tech companies to come to India?
Not really, but it was one of the first large internet companies, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like I said, you got to draw a distinction between the Yahoo content operations, which is yahoo.co.in, which is in Mumbai, and the backend stuff which happened out of here. So, and a lot of the guys who worked at the R&D center here have gone on to do really interesting and really groundbreaking things.
Hmm.
So one of those individuals, for instance, just taking an example at random, and there are many such examples, went on to develop the technology behind the facial recognition for Google Photos, for instance.
Wow.
So, if you're watching this, hi. Here.
No, actually, it's very interesting, isn't that? Because I think Google had a lot of Yahoo people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
The IPO
at the time when I worked there,
Yeah.
Jerry and Philo, the founders of Yahoo,
Yeah.
owned a stake in Google.
Yeah.
Yahoo's a company owned a stake in Google,
Yeah.
separately, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah, they had an option to buy out Google as well, which they
yeah,
they
couldn't come to an agreement.
$1 billion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you go from an internet company to a hardcore chip manufacturer.
Right. So, I work.
You have been used to doing interesting things all your life, right?
Sure. So, I optimize not for the company, I optimize for interesting people. So, whether that is work related or play related.
Yeah.
So, I optimize for putting myself in the center of interesting people.
Which basically directly correlates to knowledge.
Yes, also, but I don't necessarily do this because I want to be the most knowledgeable person around.
Experience, I think.
Experiences, community, really.
Right.
So I would say I've been participating in and building communities for 35 years. So that's my thing.
Yeah, I remember, Udhay and me met probably, of course, because of an introduction, because of Vijay. And then I was curious to know what is the Go project. But Udhay was one of those guys, I didn't know too many people in the ecosystem back then in 2016. Udhay was so willing and gracious enough to connect me to a lot of people. Udhay is one of those people, if you get connected to him, he is again like a human router. He has the list, just like the old bulletin board list. He would be like, okay, you want this? There are 3 people I know. That's just Udhay, you know. So that whole community thing has been very core about your persona, right?
Right. That it's my thing.
Yeah.
That's what I do, and this is in some sense my mission or calling.
Raison d'etre.
Pretty much, yes.
But what do you find most exciting about community? Building community, running communities.
Forming connections with people, I suppose. And see, I greatly dislike this term networking.
Mm-hmm.
Because typically the way it is used is highly transactional,
Sure.
and people want something very specific from you, and therefore they're quote unquote networking.
Right.
I greatly dislike that, and I want to build human connections with people, and I want to help. Right? And my experience has been that whatever help I give comes back to me. But that's not necessarily why I do it. I do it to form the connection. But I will also say that every professional opportunity I've ever had has been as a result of my community doing something for me.
Sure.
So which is why I'm more than happy to help if I can for anybody who asks me anything. And as a concrete example, let's say I make about 1 introduction a week. And That's an average, by which I mean I make at least 50 introductions a year, right? And I will introduce anybody to anybody. My only condition is both parties should agree, and there has to be value for both parties, not for me, right? So, whoever's looking, I will introduce you to anybody, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No. So it's kind of very interesting you mentioned that, because I think founders get into a rut and they kind of think that to do a lot of things where, of course, you touched about networking, but their initial part of the journey is they kind of think that it's very transaction because they're juggling around too many balls and they got to get to the next step. So they kind of, that relationship building and being warm and being kind and figuring that thing takes a slight back step, right? And the younger they are, this is probably more pronounced. Is that something that you've noticed? Is that something that you've seen changing over the years?
So, rather than over the years, it could be over the years for each individual, because it's as you gain some more perspective and some more experience, you figure out that firstly, what are you optimizing for in your life and in your business and in your specific, area of operations. And secondly, there's a better way to do it. And that better way is building your community. So, and community is also a word that has been very, very overused.
Loosely thrown around.
Yeah. What I mean by community is building actual human connections with actual humans.
Sure.
And you can do that by any number of different mechanisms. You can do that with a WhatsApp group. You can do that by drinking beer with people. You can do that in so many ways, right?
Right.
So, and I have built very, very general purpose communities like the Goa project, which you spoke about, and very, very more focused things like Linux user groups,
Oh, wow.
right?
So nationwide both.
Correct. The thing is, you are connected by some common interest, at least one common interest, if not more. But what makes it a community is not necessarily that common interest. That's what brings you together. But what makes it a community are the connections you form among the humans that make up this community.
Sure.
So you're not a community because I have installed Red Hat 3.5 and so have you. That might be what brought us together. But hey, you know what? Sandeep always has interesting insights, so I want to talk. Or Pushkar always comes up with something really crazy that crashes the system.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
So I want to spend time with you. It may be because you installed Red Hat 3.5 that I initially met.
Get to know you.
But that's not the reason why we continue to engage.
Yeah.
And when you were running the accelerator, did you also try to make community a cornerstone of it?
Yes, in the sense that within a specific construct like a cohort-driven accelerator program, over time, the most valuable part of the program, and this is my belief, is the alumni community.
Yeah.
Like what YC says.
Like
Techstars,
yeah.
all of these.
And my belief is, if you look at the most successful examples, like YC, like Techstars, or any of the other, more vertical examples, the value is not necessarily the formal part of the program. The value is the connections you made and the alumni network that you become a part of.
Yeah, we say the same thing for MBA network as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're paying for the access to the network.
Absolutely.
The brand and the access to the network. Yeah.
Yes, I'm completely with you on this.
Yeah. So Udhay, one of the things I want to really touch upon, and I think you were here when this was happening, was a period of, I think India won the World Cup in 2011, but 2012, 13, when that massive round happened at Flipkart, and then suddenly there was so much of excitement in the air, and there were so many people trying to cook up businesses, startups. How was it being in the center of all of that?
So it was interesting. At the time, I don't necessarily think that I thought something new was happening. This was, I had already been through a couple of boom bust cycles by now. And once you've gone through this round a couple of times, you learn to recognize the signs. Okay, it's starting to boom again. Rents are hitting 2 lakhs a month again in Bangalore, in places like HSR layout. My God. So
That's a good indicator.
that's an indicator. Yes. So okay, we're in a boom cycle again, which means that lots of checks are going to get written. And history tells us that at least 70% of those companies are going to shut down. Right? So I don't know from within the boom cycle whether I would be able to give you any useful insights. But from the perspective of now that 15 years have passed since that has happened, yeah, that was an interesting boom cycle because there were some really big exits that were, you could see the signs once you have some perspective. You can see the signs that, okay, that big Flipkart exit that happened, the groundwork was laid during this time. And a few others who went on to become big successes, Girish from Freshworks and people like that. They kind of got their maybe not second wind, but at least 1.5 wind during that time. Few other ecosystems outside of just Bangalore started being built in the startup.
Right.
For some reason, Madras became a SaaS hotspot. Right? You had fintech in Bombay. You had even tier 2 cities. You had Trivandrum, you had Jaipur, you had even Coimbatore and so on. Some of the roots of that was in this time period you mentioned. It is, with the benefit of hindsight, it was a very interesting time.
I think the same thing happened in the VC ecosystem as well, right? Because post 2002-3, a lot of the cross-border funds shut down. And then 2010-11, you had that first pedigree of Indian-born VC starting out as well, right? So this has definitely affected that in terms of ability to people to raise $20-30 billion in their first fund. And then, say, for example, a Bloom probably started in that time period, right?
Sure. So I wouldn't say those were the first Indian-born VCs. The first Indian-born VC was probably ICICI 85. But having said that, this was another wave, perhaps wave 2 or wave 3 of Indian-born VCs. And I think that's a very important thing for the maturity of the ecosystem as a whole, because if all of your LPs and money are coming from outside India, your incentives are aligned towards making stuff happen that suits the interest of those LPs' focus areas. Right? And I think it's important that you have LPs and funds from India. You have pure rupee funds from India,
Domestic funds.
so that the interests are all aligned
Sure.
in building the ecosystem. So from that perspective, yes, I think it's important.
Wow. Just one follow-up question. Because you have lived through 12-13 boom cycle and then again post-COVID, 21-22, we had another bull cycle, bull run. So do you think there were any differences, like had the ecosystem matured much more in 10 years down the line, or it was still the same frenzy?
So each boom bust cycle has a lot of commonalities and a lot of unique features as well. And I think COVID is a unique thing. It made huge successes of companies like Zoom, for instance, which probably would not have happened without lockdowns across the world. And so there were some unique things, and so there was a lot of capital looking for places to go. There were a lot of people sitting at home not knowing how to fill their time. Right, so which led to both boom in e-commerce and possibly a population explosion. Although I don't know the actual numbers for that was. So I'm not sure that the COVID years necessarily is a good blueprint for other boom bust cycles, because there are some unique aspects to that.
Right. No, I meant from a VC perspective, like investors.
From a VC perspective, it is definitely a boom cycle. A lot of checks got written. Many of those did not lead to successful outcomes, but that's okay. That's the business they're in. So I'm not sure what other light I can throw on this, because it is a boom cycle. It is a boom cycle that had some unique features because of a worldwide pandemic.
Right.
But apart from that, it's a boom cycle.
What I had in mind was 12-11 was the first time India saw a lot of money. a lot of venture dollars like $50 million, $30-40 million rounds.
Sounds okay.
By 21-22, that ecosystem had matured, even though we had a blip in 16, 17, 18. So at that time where VC is more aware of what current companies to fund for, or it was still plain hysteria, like, hey, there's a smart guy, just write him a $10 million check and we'll figure out.
Right. But, perhaps let me propose an alternative lens to look at this. If you look at the previous boom bust cycles, if let's say we start from
2000.
99, 2000, right? The dot-com boom. If you look at the VC funds in that era, a good-sized fund would be $100 or $150 million.
Right.
And let's say in 2016, a good-sized fund will be $600-700 million. But the same economics of approximately 10 to 25 investments per fund,
Right.
that still holds good, right? So,
Yes.
So either you blame part of it on inflation, part of it on just more capital with the large LPs looking for places to
Money supply.
Yeah, money supply. But I don't think the basic economics of a fund writing $10 to $25 million, 10 to 25 checks over the lifetime of the fund, and that whole 7 to 10 years lifetime that they have to look for exits. Those basic characteristics didn't change. Then boom cycles come and boom cycles go, right? Right now it is supposedly a funding winter, but as long as you have the word AI in your pick,
You raise
they're
money.
seeing large.
But I think the ecosystem, in my mind, shifted kind of quite dramatically post the Vision Fund, because the Vision Fund
That is true.
frenzy, everybody else was forced to go out and raise
Light.
a truck of money.
No, I agree,
Then
I agree.
suddenly you have a fund
Yeah.
which has $1 billion or more, which means that a couple of your investments need to result in 5-10 billion public outcomes at the end of 10-12 years, makes this whole finding a needle in a haystack meant it to be finding a needle in a haystack in Madagascar in a particular district. Becomes all the more difficult, right?
Yeah, if you want venture scale outcomes, which is why I find it difficult to understand some of these investments.
We were talking about this,
Yeah.
that venture capital was always a cottage industry. Like 100 million, like you said, or $500 million was a big fund. But then SoftBank, Tiger, they just changed it. But I don't understand, like, say, if you have $100 billion fund, is it even possible for one investment to return the fund?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
That has been the underlying
That's the
hypothesis of venture capital industry.
So I think the only logic that I can understand for the existence of $100 billion fund is to completely own an industry. And therefore you have, you can,
You control one industry, you invest in all players.
so either you invest in all players or you invest in all the players that matter and the others die off. And therefore you control all the last man standing. That's the only way a fund of that size even makes sense. And you have to pick then the sectors that are essentially indispensable to modern life,
Right.
whether it has semiconductors or some kind of climate tech, for instance. The only play you have if you're sitting on a pile of money that large is I want to own the industry. I don't think there's any other play.
The entire value chain,
Yeah, exactly.
from production to customer,
Yeah.
you need to own that, and that's got to be relevant for the next 20-30 years, basically.
I don't see what other play you can do with a pile of money that large.
They invested 200 million in a dog walking app called WAG. I
No,
don't
but
know.
but I think other significant thing that Pushkar, I think we've talked about it a few times, but the whole playbook of what has worked in the US, just bring that model and the VCs will fund you.
Yeah, so this is why, like I said, it's important to have homegrown VCs, homegrown LPs.
Yeah.
Right? So where all the interests are aligned and your incentives are aligned to the growth of this ecosystem.
Yeah. I mean, like, for example, I mean, look at companies like Meesho, for instance. Meesho is a very India-specific play. This whole QR app, fintech play, it's a very India stack. So, those companies arose because that whole old baggage of, hey, this is what somewhere else in the world will work in India, that sort of got away, right? So, you want to make India-specific thematic regional bets of what will work.
Sure, assuming that that's your investment thesis. If your investment thesis happens to be these are entrepreneurs who are physically located here, but their customers could be located anywhere, and the problems that they're solving are not necessarily unique to India, then and there are lots of investors whose thesis is like that. That I don't see that as a bad thing. But I see the existence of investors who look at India-specific bets. That's a good thing. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should not have other kinds of investors.
Right. But in your opinion, then, do Indian founders, I'm sure they have some advantages, but what do you think, like, what are the biggest advantages over US or European counterparts, Chinese founders? First of all, do they have an advantage?
Are we scrappy? Are we jugaad?
Do we even have any advantage over them? No.
Yes. Yes and no. I'm leaning more towards no than yes, because
That's it. Okay.
because I know that there's this narrative around jugaad and so on.
Yeah, Hassan.
I don't necessarily subscribe to that as being a good thing in all contexts. There are some contexts in which that's a good thing, but otherwise, it habituates you to settling for good enough,
Right.
which is not necessarily a great mindset.
You're not the path to
Yeah,
excellence.
but having said that, I have worked with entrepreneurs in non-India, non-US
Geographies.
geographies. Let me not get more specific than that. And I find that Indian entrepreneurs do have an advantage in terms of being in hustle mode, shall we say. I've worked with entrepreneurs from other countries who are a lot more laid back and will let things happen, which in my experience is not strongly correlated with a successful outcome. Like for a founder of a company. So yeah, to go back to your question, do Indian entrepreneurs have any advantages? I don't see the fact that you're from India as being necessarily an advantage in and of itself. But I have said that it's not a disadvantage in and of itself, and that is progress.
No, but a booming economy helps just because Indian economy is growing quickly. That could be one advantage.
Look, I don't disagree with that. But that's, there are boom bust cycles everywhere, and we happen to have the world's largest population of working age at this point in time.
Right.
Which, unless you do the right things, is not necessarily an advantage, right? So you got to have education, you've got to have job creation and so on.
Right.
But there are boom cycles everywhere. There are bust cycles everywhere. Just the fact that you happen to be from India is not necessarily an advantage in itself. But today we're at a point where I can say it's not a disadvantage in and of itself. And that's progress.
It used to be disadvantage 20 years ago.
Yeah. 20 years ago, or maybe not 20, let's see, 25 years ago, you could not even make a payment outside India on an Indian credit card.
Yeah.
Wow.
You could not pay for web hosting, for instance. Right? I could not pay for, I ran a web hosting business, which I could not pay using an Indian credit card. I had to make other revenues.
So 25 years ago, you owning a credit card in India is like sub 5 million or sub 3 million. Probably.
That is true.
Very small, right?
Even less.
Yeah, not even less. Yeah.
So, but those are all factors that made being a technology entrepreneur from India a disadvantage in and of itself. Yeah.
Right.
So the fact that it's not necessarily a disadvantage today is progress.
Awesome. I mean, Udhay, thanks for taking the time out. It was a very enjoyable conversation. I think our viewers would love to hear this, and especially coming from somebody like you who's got 30 plus years in the ecosystem. Fantastic. I want to have a special shout out to our location hosts and friends at Beehive. We have great locations all over the city and now in Mumbai as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Many thanks.
Thank you.